the next story comes from We Live Security, which is the ESET blog. And the title here is Deceptive Development Targets Freelance Developers. This is a spin on something we talked about a couple of shows ago. The deal here is, I guess it's purported to be North Koreans, although they actually, unlike most attempts to attribute attacks to nation states, they actually do a reasonable job of laying out why they assert it's North Korea, and you can come to your own conclusion after reading the article. But the assertion here is that North Korean adversaries are attempting to lure freelance developers, specifically in the blockchain / cryptocurrency space. But the reason, I don't care so much about that. I think most of that's a scam anyway. I think it's more of a harbinger of things to come. Like, I think this technique is likely to be used in other contexts, so it's better to get ahead of it than not. But anyway, the attack here is to lure would-be freelancers to apply for these freelance positions. The quote recruiter engages with the candidate, and through a series of discussions, sets up what I'll loosely call a coding test. And so the adversary here will either send directly a set of files or provide access to a private GitHub repository, or GitLab or Bitbucket or one of the other code repositories that the victim has to download, and then has an assignment, and they have to actually make some change to the code, and that part is real. But the attack comes in when they're asked, and by the way, like, before you send this back to me, the recruiter, you should compile it and make sure that it runs and does what you say, because otherwise you would look silly. And that's where the problem comes in. So the code it's actually typically actual code. It doesn't necessarily have, like, an embedded binary or anything like that. But what it does have is some malicious code appended at the end of a very long comment, which is then unescaped, so that some at the end of a very long comment, which extends off the side of the screen. And unless you have something in your code editor that allows you to see the wrapped comment, which is not the default, by the way, in most editors, you're not going to see it. And that is where the malicious code lives. And so once you run that, then it will infect your computer. There's a variant of that where the malicious recruiter will ask the candidate to get onto a web meeting, and of course they use some wacky kind of web conferencing software that requires the candidate to go and download an application to participate in the web meeting, which of course is malware. The idea in all of that, by the way, is ultimately to steal, at least in this instance, is to steal cryptocurrency, which is apparently what North Korea is really big on, trying to, get some cash for their various military programs, apparently, allegedly. But again, I think that as a technique, we're very likely to see this being adopted by more garden variety threat actors, and especially in this time of interesting employment. I think it's very likely that employees, like current employees who perhaps are seeking jobs at other employment at other organizations, because they're trying to get out of something they don't like, whether it's return to office or what have you. We know from previous discussions that there are, this is an attack technique that adversaries are using, where the employee is just like a bystander, or they're a victim of convenience. The actual intended victim is the company. And so that's where, I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize the instance that they're talking about here, where it's a individual person who's the victim, but I think where this is ultimately headed is as a tactic to attack and gain entry into organizations through employees who are looking for work.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's an easy step to go from employees looking for work to I'm willing to pay you for a side gig if as a freelancer to do this code work for me. Uh, I'll pay you $5,000,
Right.
and then have something that looks fairly legitimate, but I'm attaching this sort of malware that I'm hoping you're going to do the work on your corporate machine or something that has access to your corporate environment, or in some way it gives me more insight into the corporate environment. So
Exactly.
I could see that being worth the investment to some of these threat actors, depending on how valuable the target is. So it's not even, because one thing we don't talk about is, hey, if I come up to somebody in your help desk and say, I want to pay you $10,000 to install this piece of software, there's a certain percentage of them that are going to say yes, or
Mm-hmm.
employees in general, especially disgruntled employees. This, they don't even know necessarily that they're unwittingly being a bad actor for you, and they're just making money on the side and everybody's happy while they're sneaking some sort of quiet malware into the environment.
Yeah, and to carry on to that, if you have an employee who's doing this, they're going to be doing it on the down low, right?
Right.
They're going to be trying to hide it. If something happens, and even if they realize it, they're probably not going to be upfront about it.
All the more reason for them to not report it when something weird happens too.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's interesting. The blog post itself is very detailed, by the way. If you want like very detailed data in IOCs, it's in the blog post. It's pretty extensive, but it's a clever technique. Now, mind you, it's targeted at a very select group of potential targets who are coders and who know how to code this particular thing. And but I could see this being, like you mentioned, a step to get at a very specific target. Or hey, somebody who's just they want to steal crypto or they want to steal banking information. There's a whole bunch of options that you can do once you get your code running on somebody's machine.
Yeah, exactly. And developers, I won't say that they usually have elevated access, but they often have access to source code. And so I think there's perhaps a flavor of attack that could end up being some kind of a supply chain type attack. I don't know exactly how that would necessarily work, because presumably that they're, well, I would hope they're not using the same laptop, but I mean, maybe they are. I don't know. But if your intention is to perform some kind of a SolarWinds style attack, and you're able to trick some developer at a victim company who's developer of the software that you're trying to attack, this might be a way to target a developer who has the access to the code that you need. So
Yeah.
um,
So from a defensive standpoint, I think everything's very situational, but I would say to those being asked to download custom code for something like this, be very, very cautious.
yeah,
And, you know, I run it through some sort of code analysis tool, maybe. But I don't know. It's so easy to hide this stuff. I can't think of anything that's very consistently capable of detecting custom malicious code.
yeah, run it in a VM. Do
Yeah.
this kind of stuff in a VM that doesn't have anything else. I mean, it's not perfect. It's not perfect by any stretch. Still
You
opportunities
know,
for lateral movement, but
rather than running in your own machine, maybe you've run on one of your company's servers.
It's true. Throw it in a container and push it to production.
Look,
It's a great good point. I mean, because look, there's EDR on your production server, so
hopefully.
like, probably the safest place to run it.
Anywho, it's an interesting one. It bears watching. I think this will continue to evolve into more sophisticated methodologies too.
Yeah,
And once these ideas get out there, they just iterate and iterate and iterate. So it's interesting to know and to watch.
exactly.